الحمد لله. الحمد لله. ازيك يا دكتور؟ الحمد لله. يا راجل. الحمد لله. اتفضل. مساء الخير.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Frontline Club. Thank you for coming this evening. Before I hand over to our chair tonight, Jeremy Bowen, who's BBC's Middle East editor, if I can ask you to put your phones to silent, and when it comes to questions, if you can wait for the microphone because we are broadcasting live. So over to Jeremy.
Thank you very much. Just checking my phone is indeed on silent. Welcome to the Frontline Club this evening. We've got an hour and a half, and I hope to make this as interactive as possible. Our guest tonight, Yosri Fouda, one of Egypt's, if not the most distinguished journalist in Egypt, whose nightly show on TV, on the On TV channel, 3-hour discussion program 4 times a week, is, as he's just been saying to me, it's really a little slice of Egypt. People who come in and thrash out the day's events, and there have been so many events in, well, not just the last couple of months, but really the last few years. Think back to the euphoria that followed the fall of Mubarak back in February 2011. It does seem like a very long time ago now. I think that in Egypt, my impression was that no one was under any illusions about the difficulties that would lie ahead. I think in Europe and in America, there were some hopes that Egypt might become like the Netherlands or Germany within about 3 months. But Sweden even, yeah, Norway. But that was not to be, and I think that anybody looking at it with any sense would realize that that was always going to be a difficult thing. So now we all know the situation that we're in. I don't need to remind you, this very informed audience, of just exactly what's been happening and what continues to happen, and the fact, Yosri, that Egypt, the most populous Arab nation, is once again in deep crisis. Many difficulties lying ahead and difficulties at the moment. If you had to point to one thing that might change to make things better for Egypt, what would it be?
Empathy. I think this is what everybody needs now. Allow me first to thank you so much for being next to me tonight. Allow me also to thank the Frontline Club, the club of which I'm so proud, having been a founding member of this magnificent venue, and to thank everybody who took the trouble to be here tonight. Once again, Egypt finds itself in going through turning points within what I always believed that it will be the case, which is a learning process for everyone. Nobody knew what was going to happen on the 25th of January 2011. No one, don't believe anyone who would have tried to fool you into knowing what the future is going to be like. But I remember that moment that, as Jeremy rightly pointed out, it was euphoric because it meant, first and foremost, that the fabric of the Egyptian character was beginning to change. And that is fundamental. Now, steps towards some sort of a democratic transition take time by nature. And it's very difficult to try and intellectualize a situation of which you are very much an integral part. But I, like many other people in the country, tried to always see the bigger picture. You can't always be on top of that, because after all you are a citizen of that country, and you don't really, you have your fears and your hopes and your wishes. You try as much as you can as a professional to see the picture from everybody's point of view. But I must say, in fairness to all the parties involved in Egypt, including myself, because sometimes I find myself a little bit out of line, and I have to confess that the degree of polarization in the country is horrendous, unprecedented, and it takes a lot of courage to try and see the picture from other people's point of view.
Is that why you're talking about empathy?
Yeah.
The necessity of doing that. Why do you think there is this politics now in Egypt? Seems to me that yes, the Muslim Brotherhood in government was incompetent. I don't think anybody, even people in the Muslim Brotherhood, have said they weren't very good at it.
Some believe it.
Some, maybe not publicly too much, but a common accusation was that they didn't govern for Egyptians, they governed for themselves. It was winner-takes-all politics. And one of the problems now, surely, is that it's the same pattern is being repeated, but the other way around. That the army and those who are supporting them think that they can take it all as well. Yeah. And in Egypt, do you need something like they've been trying to do in Yemen, having a long-term dialogue? I mean, maybe the problems in Egypt are too urgent to give months to it like they've done in Yemen. But some sort of national consensus, surely, you need.
Absolutely, and that in the end, what I believe will happen. It's just what the price will be.
What do you mean how you get to that point?
On your way to achieving that point, which I have no doubt that this is going to be the only way out of this. I think it all started on the eve of the first round, the second round of the presidential election. Mm-hmm. When all of a sudden you only have either Dr. Morsi representing not only the Muslim Brothers, but indeed the larger context of the so-called Islamic forces, on the one hand, and Dr. Ahmed Shafiq, who's viewed largely as a representative of the Mubarak era. Now, most people at the time thought, well, we did not revolt against Mubarak to vote for another Mubarak, with all due respect to everyone who voted Ahmed Shafiq at the time. I'm talking about especially those, if you like, hardcore Tahrir Square, quote-unquote again, Islamists in general. So,
if I just interrupt at this point, why do you, let's not rehash history too much, but why was it that those people, the hardcore Tahrir people, the people who are at the forefront of the uprising against Mubarak, were unable to organize themselves sufficiently to put a credible enough candidate into the race to get to the second round?
Yeah, absolutely.
It struck me at the time as the most terrible political failure.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you, but you're talking about young people, young boys and girls, very enthusiastic, staunch freedom believers, and that can be, it takes time to realize
so
that you can, it takes time to realize, time and experience and a bigger vision to realize that there's no contradiction necessarily between being free and being organized at the same time. Now, on the other hand, you're talking about a group, the Muslim Brothers, which has been around for more than 80 years, functioning in more than 80 countries around the world. The very doctrine of the group itself is very organized. Talking about one feature, for instance, which is called in Arabic al-Sam' wa ta'a, which means you listen and you obey. So it's a very organized group, quite familiar with working underground and waiting for certain things to happen, and there's some sort of a conformity within the group vis-a-vis a very undefined group of young people, and also not to overlook other, I'm not talking only about those young people, I'm talking also about, in terms of age, even older people who wanted and believed always in a moment like this, whether they are on the left or on the right. But the most striking fact that can explain a lot of this, you're talking about decades of political annihilation, which was made on purpose by Mubarak. I call the 30 years of Mubarak the era of do nothing.
Yeah, stagnation, right?
Complete stagnation and the systematic killing of any meaningful political life. And before that, Sadat also. It was all, a series of power struggle, and that was a natural product of it, that you get the first generation in a shape like this, not being able to organize themselves.
Okay. So, in terms of looking to the future, what can we extrapolate from that? Is it the case then for the interests of all Egyptians, and of course the problem is that people define the interests of all Egyptians in different ways, that a good way ahead would be to, first of all, get the shape of where you want to go before you start having elections and start trying to discuss it? I mean, that was what a lot of people on the more secular side and on the Tahrir side were saying back then, were they not, before the presidential elections?
Yeah. If you're talking about the very moment that we're going through now, I think you're going to need some time. What happened on June the 30th, perhaps more significantly on July the 3rd, which many people in the beginning at least did not know how to define. Was it a coup? Was it not?
Where do you stand on that, by the way?
I'll get to that.
That's C word.
But what's more important than this question is you're talking about a group like the Muslim Brothers, which had been working for more than 80 years in more than 80 countries, and only in a few months, really, its brand image lost a lot, tremendously. And it was like somebody had been looking at an apple out there for 80 years, more than 80 years, and then gets a chance to put their hand on it and even take a bite from it, and all of a sudden it's not there. So what happened in every sense was a shock. And I always believed, and every time I hear little news, whether they're true or not, about an intention by the Interior Ministry or even the army, they go out and do something about the sit-ins in Cairo. I always thought that that would be really a clumsy idea. First of all, you really need to see things from their point of view, i.e. from not only the Muslim Brothers' point of view, but indeed, you're talking about a large array of Muslims. Many of them do not really belong to a specific group, and they have their own grievances. You're talking about also a large chunk of Salafists, and you really needed to see the world from their own point of view. What happened actually was the contrary. What happened is that many voices really went for go, get them, annihilate them, and the rest of it. I didn't know in the beginning whether they meant annihilate them, personally, or the group, because there's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And that message wasn't made clear, even by those who, who we thought had already been out of the picture and gradually came back again to the picture.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me where you stand on the coup thing if you don't want to, but if we can talk a bit about that. I was in Egypt at this particular time on June the 30th, and then when the army took over and so on, and then the week or so after that. And, first of all, I went to interview Baradei just at that time. I can't quite remember if it was the day after the army removed Morsi. I saw Baradei, and I said, so why are you supporting a coup? He said, it's not a coup. I said, well, by every for me, by every definition of the word coup, it was a coup. And he said, oh no, it can't possibly be a coup because it has public support. I said it just makes it a popular coup, at least among certain members of society. Not everybody, because I had spent time with Muslim Brotherhood supporters at their sit-ins, and I knew that they hated what was happening. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, this struggle over the definition of what exactly happened. In a way, that's perhaps about trying to control the story, the narrative, to use that word, about what's going on.
And that's what confused Washington a lot, and with it, the rest of the Western world. They didn't know what to say exactly, and even using a single word during a press conference could land them in serious trouble. Of course, the army moved, and of course, many people took to the streets. But perhaps more importantly, the last 5 or 6 months of Dr. Morsi's rule were not very happy. And he didn't really, first and foremost, he was not, as he promised, he was never a president for every Egyptian. And that, in my opinion, was the first thing that many people felt. And when you use the language of my own people against all Egyptians and the rest of it, and then back in November when you try to grab as much power in your own hand as possible, things started to fall down, and the trust was really dealt a very strong blow. And it was obvious during the last week of November, on the eve of the so-called Constitutional Declaration, and the way, and I think it was actually Khairat al-Shatir who was running the scene. It's no secret now. They dealt with a handful of protesters sitting in by the palace in Al-Ittihadiyya, around Al-Ittihadiyya. That night was really horrible. And if anyone would have seen me that night on my show, that was the night that I made up my mind, and I had to apologize in case Dr. Morsi took any votes through my show when I interviewed him during the second round of the election, because that was definitely what we were in for. But all the way before that, I was trying to hold the revolutionary powers, Islamic or non-Islamic, together all the time, bringing people from all dominations. It doesn't matter. You can, so long as you respect everybody's point of view, you have your place on my show, which wasn't actually the case with some other channels, Islamic and non-Islamic again. After that, something happened in the psyche of a big chunk of Egyptians. And when you lose...
After the Constitutional Declaration.
After the Constitution, and after what happened
which, to remind
outside,
people, that's when he took great powers to himself.
He tried. But
tried to, yeah.
But in the end, from that point on, they began to realize that they are not in control. And again, even from his very inner circle, his aides and his advisors, and he started to everybody coming out, resigning or voicing their objection to one decision or the other. Again, I tried to find some excuse because they had no experience whatsoever in running a country. And when you have a situation like this, try to include other people, especially those who were part and parcel of the revolution with you in the square itself. I understand, they had enough common enemies. And yet, I think the legacy of more than 80 years of working underground, being subjected, and we have to always remember this, to all sorts of oppression and exclusion and torture in some cases, and the rest of it, got them a little bit ahead of themselves. And they wanted to not only form the government, but actually reshape the state.
Now,
and that's what most Egyptians, they were scared about. And the army, one of the forces, I know this firsthand, that And allow me to say this because this is, I'm trying to get to answer your main question, coup or no coup.
Okay.
One piece of information: the army under Morsi had more privileges compared to what they had even under Mubarak. Now, what would prompt someone like Sisi, the defense minister, to risk putting his own neck under the sword? This is one fact that we always need to remember. Again, does this mean that I am with a coup of any sort, whether it is a popular coup or not? No. I'm a believer in freedom and in democracy. But when you see the country, not only the government or the parliament, and you see the constitution being written in a certain way, and I had almost on a daily basis getting people from different points of view discussing the draft of the constitution, debating it, and gradually you find it's almost one chunk of the Egyptian society writing the constitution, which will govern everyone in the country. And then you face yourself with certain questions. Who on earth would object to a phrase in the constitution that says it is human trafficking is illegal? And then when you find from the draft that it is, some people within the assembly, the Constituent Assembly, say, insisting that this phrase shouldn't be there. And when you wonder with yourself, why on earth would, and then you arrive at certain things like, it's probably to do with those young, filthy Arab Gulf people, with all due respect to everyone, some of them, some of them, who come to places like Syria, Lebanon, Egypt with pretty girls, very young, and they marry them for what's worth a couple of grand in sterling. They give them to them. Because under the UN definition of this phrase, that is human trafficking. So it's things like this that started to build up until you reach a point. And the main thing is that a group of Egyptians thought that they can run the country alone, with the appearance of running it with everyone. We ended up in the Constituent Assembly having a Muslim representing the Christians. And he's a very good friend of mine. And he said, I had to play the role because you needed a Christian, a guy at least to represent you're talking about at least 10 million Christians in the country. Mm. There was no representative for them.
How deep do you think is the Muslim Brotherhood's attachment to democracy? Because in the time, back at the beginning of 2011, before that, and the rest of that year when Egypt was starting its transition to who knows where, I lost track of the number of Muslim Brotherhood people who'd say to me, you've got to believe us. We really do believe now in democracy. It's what we really want to have. And I'd say, well, what about this phrase that people would use, one person, one vote, one time? It's like, no, it's not going to be like that. And senior Western ambassadors, I remember telling me as well, around the time of the presidential elections, were saying, I think they're serious about this. People bought into that idea that perhaps they were very serious about democracy. I have to say, a lot of Egyptians who I spoke to said, don't believe a word that they're saying. Don't believe a word that they're saying. They have no interest whatever in democracy. How deep do you think is there?
It is in the eye of the beholder. I never start by doubting their intentions. Maybe that's what they think that democracy is. So because I've been this on a daily basis with them, discussing this during debates on my show. So I let them speak. I had to, once I remembered an interview that the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan gave to a Turkish journalist when he was still governor of Istanbul. And that journalist asked him about democracy, and Erdogan said to him, democracy is like a tram. You ride it until you reach your destination and then you get off. Now, many people, this is whether or not this is right, from a point of view of a journalist like myself, I can't judge anyone. But what really matters here is how others would perceive that. And what I could say quite comfortably, either whether on my show or otherwise, is that many people in Egypt felt a little bit of that. They felt that Muslim Brothers and perhaps more obviously Salafist groups, because Salafists always believed that democracy is haram. In that sense, Western democracy is haram. And going out and protesting against the ruler is haram, and the rest of it. And yet, they were there at the front immediately after those 18 days in Tahrir Square, and they were a very big player. And I'm happy that they are included in the political process. But in the end, do they really mean it, or do they not? Many people in Egypt, this is a fact, felt that the Muslim Brothers thought that this is our moment. We're going into that room and we're locking the door. Small details to this effect is trying to manipulate the election law, insisting not to change the cabinet before the elections are done. The opposition tried very hard, and they would have been more than happy, by the way, and we wouldn't have seen a coup if Morsi listened to only those two things. Enlarge the cabinet, change the prime minister, make it as representative as possible so that we feel okay if we go into elections together. And you can't give me a law like this, changing the constituencies so that it fits with where you're popular against where you're not popular, and especially in poor places in Upper Egypt and the rest of it. Because that, in the end, if you don't listen to things like this, then maybe you are trying to close the door to others.
Let's take a few questions, shall we? There are microphones. If you could please only speak when you have a microphone in your hand. If you stick your hand up, if you want to be, there's a microphone just behind you there. And
my name is Huwaida, and I come from Egypt, and I live in the area where the sit-in is, Rab'a al-Adawi. I only have one question. When people say you don't interfere in an area, because I live in the area and I'm firsthand what's happening there, would this be allowed in England or America or anywhere else in the world, where you can't go to your houses except after being searched by their militias? They have militias now. And the security people and the people who work in my area, they've been in their tents. Obviously, I wouldn't go. And they said they have guns and ammunitions, and they will explode the whole area if the police tries to come in. So I just want to ask, if we are going to include them again in the political process, wouldn't it be possible that we have to define what terms and regulations they have to play by? I mean, if they come back the same way they are, how they can be included in the political situation, and how can the normal Egyptians like them?
okay, let's get one other point as well. You had your hand up first, sir, over there, and then we'll deal with those 2 points. If you could identify yourselves, please, and
yes.
If you represent anybody, say
My
so.
name is Abdullah Houda. I'm a journalist, and I belong to the Egyptian Committee for the Defense of Civil State. Yosri, my question is forward-looking, and it is in relation to the problem of the civil political forces. It looks like the army acted as a bailiff to implement the will of the people on the 30th of June and freeze the situation to give the civil political forces a chance to regroup and organize properly. Do you think that this could happen in time for the next election?
Okay, let's deal with those two points first of all.
I think, I mean, at least part of the question of the lady Hala there was directed at you.
Well, the first thing, would it happen in other countries, sit-ins like that being tolerated? And I think in Western European, probably not, actually, not long-term, no. If you remember a couple of years ago, those of you who live in London, a couple of years ago, there was a big sit-in around St. Paul's Cathedral. And, you know, in the end, I didn't quite get involved too much in the detail of it, but I probably wasn't in the country. But I was dealing with other people's sit-ins at the time. But, yeah, it was very unwelcome for people who didn't agree with their objectives. So, yeah, that's the fact. Well, in the end, they rounded them up and kicked them out, didn't they? Yeah. Yeah, court action, yeah. That's right. Good. Yeah, well, there you go. No, you have to follow the rule of law, I think, on these particular things. But, you know, perhaps it's unfair. I don't know, what do you think? Do you think it's unfair to make comparisons between an established, mature democracy like ours and one where democracy is a very, very new and fragile plant? In fact, Baraday said that to me.
Yeah.
I said to him, well, look, actually, whether you liked it or not, the fact is there was an election from everybody abroad, from Obama down, and people within the country as well, welcomed it. But the whole point about elections is that you wait until the next election, but you don't go out in the streets and try and change the government that way around. And Baraday said to me, look, that may work fine in Western Europe, but we're not Western Europe. And things are very new and fresh and fragile here. And basically, we need to reboot things. We need a new start. Comparisons fair?
Well, definitely. The comparison would be very difficult. Otherwise, we'll have to compare everything. The trouble starts when one party starts to pick and choose a small detail in other communities and try, look at them there, do they do that? But, again, you'll always be faced, but, they also do this and that. Now, there is a particular situation in Egypt. Salafiyu Costa, the coffee shop. So they call themselves Salafiyu Costa, and they are so tolerant. And they keep whatever they believe in. We believe in, the main salient points of Salafism, which is to take after everything that Al-Khulafa al-Rashidin or the guided
rightly
Khulafa,
guided.
Rightly guided Khulafa did, and the rest of it. And that's it's everybody's right to believe in whatever they want to believe in, and to have their own vision as to what this country should be like. So it's going to take time until we really finish this introduction to one another. I think it would be really wise, and if I was part of the Muslim Brothers, is to take a step back at this moment. They should be allowed first to absorb the shock, because it is a shock. And we have to start, all of us, talking about Baraday and your discussion with him. I'm totally for this. We shouldn't go to the ballot and then establish for anything else other than the ballot. This is the overall principle that all of us should believe in. Now, but what happened is against this. Yes, we should acknowledge this. And then we should move to point number 3. Why did it happen? And then I should encourage Muslim brothers to take a step back in time and try to answer a few difficult questions. Why is it? Like the Americans did immediately in the aftermath of 9/11, with, of course, the comparison is different, but at least in that sense, there is a little bit of similarity. When that very big and painful question was put to debates, why do they hate us? Because when you hear many voices after the 3rd of July, actually on June the 30th and immediately after, but especially after the 3rd of July, they were really, they showed a lot of hatred. This is the word for it. And this is the danger. When voices like this come out and speak against, go and get them and the rest of it. And we've gone through a couple of bloody experiences. You were at one of them. You yourself was injured. And it's just like, it's not right. It's not right that we resort to violence.
Well, let's move on to the next question that was asked. Do you remember? Do you want a reminder of it? Civil military. Yeah.
Egypt doesn't have a very pleasant experience with military rule, and we moved from the days of Nasser to Sadat and then Mubarak, and then we have a recent experience with SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, which lasted for a year and a half. And it was painful for both parties, by the way. If you talk to anyone from the military, he would say to you, never again. I was invited after I had a terrible accident recently. After I got out of the hospital, they invited me to a celebration between some military people and some civil people, some public figures. And they sat us as one civilian and one commander, one civilian, one commander. To my left was the commander of, I think, was the cyber war or something. Very nice elite guy. But to my left was the commander of artillery. And there were some young officers with their families in the background, every now and then shouting the famous slogan, الجيش والشعب إيد واحدة, army and people are one hand. And every time they shout this, the commander of the artillery is, never again. We've tried you for 500 days. And what did we have in the end? We were shaving in the street. We were going to the toilet in the street. And we were called names by kids calling us dirty names in the street. So they too had a very bad experience with us. And they too have been trying to learn something or another. I dare say that if this did not happen, those 500 days, the situation after June the 30th would have been completely different. So we're learning.
But the army will remain, though, as a major, or the most important power broker, whatever happens, won't it?
I'm Egyptian. I would like my army to always be strong. Why is this a discrepancy?
But they're a lot more than an army, though, aren't they?
Look at,
I mean, there's all the economic power that they have, the businesses that they run. The army in Egypt is not like armies in most other countries. Is it desirable to change that? Because surely that economic power is not something that they would be prepared to give up.
Yeah, that's been there for a very long time, and you would have expected from our first elected president to discuss issues like this. On the contrary, he actually gave the army everything that they asked for and more, including in the new constitution. Morsi's trouble towards the end, when it started to loom in the near horizon, that kind of conflict, are they thinking of doing something against me, or are they not? Either of two things would have happened. He would have eaten him in the morning, early in the morning, or wait for whatever. Trouble is, he didn't really have that option, because in the new constitution, he couldn't. The president, the elected president, cannot fire the defense minister. Only SCAF can.
Do you think that Morsi's point of view may have been, I can't take on the army. We'll keep the army sweet. We'll give them what they want. Meanwhile, we'll get the space we need to change the social things that we want to change and change the shape of the country. The army can keep on with what they're doing, but we want to keep on with our agenda.
I think they were hoping that they would eventually manage to do that. But you have to put it in the bigger picture and remember the historical context of that conflict always between the army and the Muslim Brothers.
There's a history.
Since they came, since the inception of the Muslim Brothers, remember the days of Nasser and especially Nasser, but then also Sadat for his own calculations, he gave them a little bit more space until some people who belong to it, if not the Muslim Brothers, but another Islamic group, ate him alive.
Let's get the microphone and to get a few more questions. There's Forrester hands.
The question has not been answered. What is the prospect of the civil forces organizing themselves to maintain and...
It's down to the opposition. It's down to the opposition. Again,
the point you were saying was,
yeah.
what are the prospects of the civil forces organizing themselves?
Yeah, I think, again, within what I refer to as the learning process, you look at their performance now, it's much better than, compared to... I myself actually picked up the phone to Hamdeen Sabahi when he, Hamdeen is a very proud politician and activist for a long time. And like rightly when you said, during the elections last year, when you look, he had nearly 5 million votes, followed by Abu Futuh with nearly 4 million votes. That's more than enough if one of them, and there were some attempts to get them together. Unfortunately, the learning process wasn't mature yet. Now, I think they took one step forward. For instance, Hamdeen opened the door to Al-Baradi and said to him, you represent all of us taking part in that dialogue with the army, Al-Azhar, the church, Tamarrud, and the rest of it. And he was happy about that. Last year, Hamdeen wouldn't have done it.
That's interesting. That's learning, maybe. Microphone up. We've got some very insistent hands at the front here. We'll take 2 or 3 points, and then we'll try and keep it moving a bit faster than we have, perhaps. Yeah. Ladies first, and then... Okay.
Bari Alamuddin. Actually, it's very interesting when you were saying, you in Egypt, how when you look around and you see the Salafists and you say, who are these people? We have exactly the same thing in Lebanon. And I see people when I go to Bahrain saying the same thing. So I think maybe it's a pan-Arab phenomenon now. My question to you is, if there is an election to be held within the next 6 months or so, what are the chances of the Muslim Brotherhood winning seats on the ground? I mean, in reality, I mean, that could perhaps tie up with the question about the civil forces organizing themselves. And what is really the Muslim Brotherhood agenda vis-a-vis the peace process with Israel, the peace treaty, I should say, not the peace process? What is it really? It seems that they have some kind of an agreement with the Americans about that.
It's true. Yeah.
Let's specifically answer those points now.
The last question, I think it was the Israelis actually. Haaretz published a piece in the immediate aftermath of the ousting of President Morsi with the headline, 4 reasons why Israelis will miss Morsi. And they talked about certain facts. Number 1, he controlled Hamas in a much more effective way compared to Mubarak and Omar Suleiman and the rest of it. Number 2, they never objected to what was, I think it was called the Israeli operation against Gaza, targeting some Hamas leaders and the infrastructure in Gaza. Morsi didn't object to that. Number 3, they kept. They started dismantling the tunnels. Number 4, I can't remember. Yeah, they adhered to every single word in the peace process. So that's, I don't know how representative this is of the Israeli government or the Israeli people in general, but certainly the Muslim brothers didn't voice any kind of challenge to, and they said it's quite frankly that we are committed to international treaties and the rest of it, and I have no doubt that they reassured all the visitors from Washington or from Europe as to this. Now, I don't think that this is the issue, because I can't think of any Egyptian who would like to take on Israel or go into a war or the rest of it. But there remain some critical issues that you also need to think of. Would it actually be better to start negotiating at least the military annex of the treaty or not, in light of what's happening in Sinai? I posed the question once to former President Jimmy Carter, and he said, if I was the Israeli Prime Minister now, it will be me who picks up the phone to the Egyptian president, asking him to meet so that we can discuss what's happening in Sinai, and we would be open-minded as to agree new terms and conditions of how we could operate on that. So when it comes to foreign policy, again, that's many people would say that President Morsi wasn't really clear as to, and I'm happy that we have the Egyptian ambassador with us here, Egyptian ambassador in London, and I, from my experience with many diplomats, the policy wasn't so clear as to in which direction. Perhaps the most striking one is the issue of water and Ethiopia, and how the Egyptian government and the presidency really, I don't want to use a dirty word here, really, I mean, it was a lesson in how not to do it.
How not to do foreign policy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the first part of the question was elections. How will they do in the next election?
That really depends on the next few days and next few weeks are going to be really critical. If, as I hope, and many Egyptians, I'm not an exception here, the Muslim brothers really take a step back and be courageous enough as to answer to themselves before anyone else a few questions, I think it would be in their own good to try and accept and maximize, if they wish, through negotiations with the government, perhaps be part of a coalition government, discuss one or two issues and the rest of it. I think there is an element of psychology, and that we have to always remind ourselves that a group that's been working for more than 80 years, and all of a sudden they are in power, all of a sudden they are out of power, feeling that they might be annihilated. Again, I have to also blame or throw at least part of the blame on the other side, especially the media coverage in my country, including the channel that I work for. We're all human beings, and everybody thought, oh wow, they are gone. But they are gone. And the word "gone," what do you mean, gone? Gone, like you wanna send them to Mars, or you want to kill them, or? But eventually, they are Egyptians, as much as you are.
But one thing that strikes me about Egypt these days is that the language, not just the language, but the practice of violence is becoming quite institutionalized in the way that people relate to each other. People use very hot-tempered language about what should happen, annihilate, get rid of, whatever. And also, martyrdom, waving around burial shrouds at Muslim Brotherhood rallies and so on. All those very stark images. That must be concerning for Egyptians.
It is very concerning, but it would be wrong to look at all of them as one block. You really have to look at the leadership, and even within the leadership, you'll find people who might, could be talkable to, others who've been obviously, clearly inciting, and then you have to look at those who are actually members of the Muslim Brothers, those who are Salafists, and then you also have to look at many of them are poor people coming from either slum areas or from villages and the rest of it. And I said, frankly, when I was asked by a high-ranking politician, I said, you guys need a task force. A task force which could work or span, it took at least about 20 years, as to what should be done now, ending with education. And in Egypt, this is a very serious problem, and also tackling poverty.
Yeah, I want to talk about a bit about education and the economy a little later. You've been very patient. You've had the microphone in your hands for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hosni Imam, Egyptian journalist. Let's not agonize, Jeremy, about semantics, a coup or not a coup. If you were in Egypt, you realize what Egypt is like. Egypt is not Switzerland, is not the United Kingdom, so you have to bear this in mind. And then, what would the West have done if they have faced a similar situation and the only way out was the intervention of the army? And part of the same question, what would you do in the West here in front of the MOD or in the Pentagon when a group of people armed attack and provoke this symbol of supremacy? I wonder whether you in the West have fallen in love with the Muslim Brothers and you are being blinded about their own mistakes and misdemeanor. My question to my friend and colleague, Yosri, you are talking about an inclusive process for Muslim Brothers. It is very nice to say that, but implementation, my friend, how can you implement this with the main problem in Egypt and in the elections, either in parliament or the presidency, was the fact that you allowed political parties to be based on an Islamic framework. This is something which was from the very beginning not allowed verbally or even among the elite who have drafted all these laws and regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think before we try to find out what is it that we would like to do or would like to have, maybe it will be a little bit more helpful in the beginning to try and find out what is it that we do not want to have. And in my opinion, what we do not want to have is going back to the time when many forces in Egypt, Islamic and non-Islamic, but particularly Islamic, had to work underground. That's, in my opinion, what should not be allowed to happen. And you're not only talking about Muslim brothers here or only Salafists. You really need to accommodate for this. And it's not going to be perfect overnight. It's going to be painful and it's going to take time. But it is much better than driving anyone underground again. That would be a horrible situation, and it will be against everything that the revolution stands for. Now, do we like this or do we not? That's another question, and you have to answer this to yourself. You don't have everything that you like in life, and you have to define your priorities, and you have to define your values and principles. Stick to your values and principles as much as you can, but you have to play politics. That's why it's called politics. Now, again, it's the responsibility of everyone, and I do not exonerate any party here, including the Muslim brothers themselves, and I've just said that they really have to have this inner dialogue. What happened? We've been around for 85 years. Why is it that we failed? Because failed, you did, okay? Why is it that they are saying this about us? Even if it, most of it is unfair, then you have to. But at the same time, you really need, on the other hand, to open the door genuinely, and not just use slogans and the door is open for them, but in actual facts you're doing something else, because it will backfire on you, definitely.
You revisit the past if you do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, let's get some questions from a little further back in the room.
The question,
Yeah. Oh, my part?
yes.
The questions you made to me? Oh, I thought it was more rhetorical, the things you were saying. Look, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that if there was a violent demonstration in front of the Ministry of Defence or the Houses of Parliament on number 10 Downing Street, our very well-equipped army and security forces would deal with it in a way that wouldn't necessarily be gentle. Well, I think that would be a little way further down the road to get the army involved. Can we get, on back row there.
Yes, Mohammed from Egypt, formerly with the BBC. My question to Mr. Fouda, when do you expect to see restructuring for the Interior Ministry and the Central Security Forces? Because that seems to be a time-ticking bomb, whether under military rule, Brotherhood rule, or even right now under the rule of the liberal forces.
Let's get one more from the rear of the room if we can, if we have hands up there. We don't. Yeah, there's one there in the corner.
Just one point about the legitimacy. I think there are two phases for the legitimacy. The first one is how to select and how to be legitimate at selection point, which is elections. If you win an election, you are a legitimate president. And then you pass to a second phase, which is how to remain legitimate once you are selected. And there, you have to obey to the constitution and you have to protect the nation and the state. And I think the second part is the part which was missed by President Morsi once he was elected. I think there was enough support of all the people who supported him and also the people who were against him in the elections of the electoral process. They accepted him as a president, and it is then the later phase, which is delivering something once you are a president and protecting the country, which was a problem. This is the first point. But my issue here, in fact, I'm a real believer of liberal democracy and making sure that we run a state which is inclusive as much as we can. However, there is something where I'm not able really to solve a problem. There are a number of points where the beliefs of the Muslim Brotherhood and probably many other religious parties, a number of beliefs are incompatible with the state, the nation idea. So one of them
Can you start wrapping up a bit and make your point? And
so borders, so a state has borders. In the Muslim Brotherhood believes the scope is the world. So border lines are something that was implemented by colonial forces, and if it separates us from our brothers, it shouldn't be there.
Okay, let's deal with those 2 points. That first one about the restructuring and that the wider, the sort of pan-Islamic views of the Muslim Brotherhood.
I think Mohammed pointed out a very crucial feature of the Egyptian revolution. After all, actually, the 25th of January was against the police. People went out calling for the police. And that's why the 25th of January is actually the anniversary, which is celebrated every year on that day by the police. And it involves, it has an English angle.
Yes, when the police, the police were heroes in resisting the British imperialists in the 1950s.
And in Ismailia, which coincidentally also happened to be the birthplace of the Muslim Brothers. So it's a very small world. Most definitely. Even before that, when I was talking about an Egyptian actually now realizing that he's a taxpayer, another small detail was every time an Egyptian would take to the streets and he sees any kind of uniform that's to do with the government, they would be saying, praying to God, Allah yustur, God, and walking. And in the immediate aftermath of the revolution, it was the other way around, which again wasn't right. Neither this is right, nor that. And the police, for a long time, suffered from that, but hasn't, people inside it haven't realized yet what should happen. What made it even worse, because under SCAF they were still like this, and they were really, some of their practices were really horrible, and they managed to antagonize, especially hardcore Tahrir Square. And again, most notably, under the first democratically elected president, who belongs to a group which took part in the revolution against mainly the practices of the Interior Ministry, actually giving them more power and using them for what he deems necessary from what his group is all about and wishing to do. It only happened, this is why al-Ittihadiyya, the first Ittihadiyya, the turning point in the immediate aftermath of the constitutional declaration, when we had the minister Ahmed Gamaluddin, who sounded a little bit reluctant in facing the mass demonstrations which were being planned towards the palace at the time. And that's what really got the better of Khayrat al-Shatir, and he held what I would call a war cabinet meeting, and then they sent some of their people, descriptions, some of their people, what they did.
You've had your hand up for quite a long time, and okay, you too, okay, that's true.
Thank you. My name is Shireen Abdelbaki. I'm a master's student here in the UK. And before I ask my question, I just wanted to take a step back regarding the start of this discussion about coup or not coup. And Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines a coup as removal of sudden, violent removal of government by a small group of people. So I just wanted to underline that I don't think 30 million people is a small group, and that it was not violent. And my question is, you already answered the hope or the possibility of better cooperation for elections, for presidential elections. And what about parliamentary elections? How do you see that with regard to the question about the participation of the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as other people in their preparation and taking, participating in that? Thank you.
And if you just pass the mic back that way.
Thank you very much. I'm Salah Abou Fadl. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and I'm also a member of the Egyptian Committee for Defending the Civil State in Egypt. My first point, or a conundrum to you, Jeremy, to answer. This obsession about the coup is just the tip of the iceberg. The Egyptian people are extremely angry, and they have been angry with the West for a very long time. We were attacked in 56. We were attacked in 67. Even in 73, the war was interfered with by the Americans to change the course. For 30 years, we were under the thumb of America with the help of Mubarak. When the Egyptians eventually rose to achieve social justice, things were changed, were moved towards the Muslim Brothers against the Egyptians' will. And of course, you can argue the Egyptians are being paranoid, but they perceive that there has been a foreign intervention. That perception may have been wrong, or maybe argued it was wrong, but 30th of June proved that the perception was probably right. This concerted...
Foreign intervention by whom, sorry?
Well, there is a strong belief that the Americans instructed the SCAF to point things in the direction of the Muslim Brothers. The changes of the Constitution happened, I don't want to prolong the point, but the changes of the Constitution happened less than 4 weeks after the Mubarak's fall, and the changes were made in the direction of the Muslim Brothers, making election of parliament primary to writing the Constitution. Muslim Brothers were given primary seats and the direction of the committee.
You think this is the Americans who were behind that?
Well, that has been said. That has been argued, yes. Okay. Now, what's happening now after this revolution? The West should have actually welcomed the Egyptians' rising uprise against what clearly proved to be an emerging religious fascism in Egypt. Instead, this obsession about the coup became the center point. Everything else became irrelevant, only a coup, and a concerted campaign against Egypt in all the Western media. Even here in Frontline Club, we had an issue there. In the BBC, and we've written to the BBC, in Chatham House, the organizer of the Egyptian file in Chatham House is a Muslim Brother lady. The examples are many, and I don't want to bore you with that. But that what makes the Egyptian people, makes me also angry, that the Egyptians always get this negative intervention and view, and even trying to block them from actually achieving what they have, and they gave martyrs.
Okay.
They have made a lot of effort. So the conundrum here for you, Jeremy, to answer, why, when the West has been against Muslim fundamentalists, against Muslim terrorism, actually support the Muslim brothers who, from under whose cloak emerged all these movements of terrorism. And actually it proved the case that Muslim brothers in Egypt are supported by Al-Qaeda and the terrorist organizations in Sinai. One of their heads said clearly after the so-called coup, said the attacks in Sinai will cease the second Morsi is restored back in office.
Okay, let me.
So that is a point for you. There is a question for Jeremy, for Yosri. It's a smaller one, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, because we've actually only got.
It's a smaller one, but it's a significant one.
Seriously, we've got less than 20 minutes left.
Yeah, it's a significant one, Yosri. Not the small. It's not insignificant. It is an important one. You're talking about the Salafis are very nice people and all that. I'm actually very tired of you in the media in Egypt always talk about the Salafis as being nice people and they have benefited from democracy and understood and have developed. The Salafis have actually been the ones who are killing Christians for the last 3 years. They have been burning churches. Before the revolution, they've been kidnapping women and Islamizing them and creating havoc. They have killed the Shiite in cold blood 3 days before the 30th of June, and you're still defending them. I'm ashamed of you in the media in Egypt. Why you're defending those people?
Right, I think
it's ridiculous.
Right. Okay.
And the Salafis is a broad thing, a broad term.
Let us
Thank
answer
you.
now.
No,
okay.
You start, Jeremy.
I'm going to start.
Thank you.
It's good. So congratulations. Listen, I certainly think that the West, and by the West I define it as the former imperial powers, the United States, have played all kinds of games, conspiratorial games of different sorts, in the Middle East for a very long time, going back to right through the last century, and probably before that too. I think that the fact that they've done that doesn't mean to say, though, that they are able to direct things quite as precisely, in my opinion, as you would say. I mean, I don't think that for the Americans, one of the reasons why they initially supported Mubarak when the uprising started against him was that they were absolutely horrified by the prospect of the Muslim Brotherhood gaining any kind of political position in Egypt. And so from knowing the Americans as I do, I think that for them, they didn't want to get the Muslim Brotherhood in that position. So I don't think that they were directing the army, as you were suggesting, or one theory you said was that they were directing the army to try to do that. I do think that the Americans and other Western countries, they attached a lot of importance to elections. They believed that the way of establishing a new Egypt was through a democratic process. So, well, there's an election, it's observed, it appears to be fair. Yes, there's some irregularities here and there, but actually it produced the result it produced. So I think they felt obliged to say, well, right, go ahead, see what you can do. And I think that on one level, when I'm talking about Western authorities of different sorts, Western governments, I think on one level, when the Muslim Brotherhood was removed from the equation, removed from power anyway, there was some relief in a sense, but that has been tempered by the violence that's developed on the streets, by the violence that the army has used, by the way that people seem to be killed in really quite large numbers. And I think that for the Americans, of course, Israel is very important and they want to keep Israel safe. That's one thing for them, which is a big priority. And I think for it's a slightly different emphasis, but I think that what they don't want is a country of the size and importance of Egypt becoming chaotic and violent, and perhaps, as some nightmare scenarios have said, some sort of, if not some failed state, some kind of new Syria. I mean, who wants anything like that happening? I think those are the perceptions, those are the kinds of discussions that are being taken. So while I absolutely accept that Western countries have tried to twist things and run things. And of course, one of the reasons why Arab dictators were able to flourish so well was they had a lot of backing from the West. Because for us, it was much easier to have an address, a single address. You want to deal with Egypt, you bring up Mubarak. And you can extrapolate, you can widen that to the rest of the region as well. Now, I think that one of the confusions that Western policy had in the immediate aftermath of the Arab uprisings in 2011 was they didn't know who to talk to. They really didn't. Instead of one address, there was suddenly a whole lot of addresses that they had to try to go to. And I think that was something... I thought the election said that the Egyptian people chose the Muslim Brotherhood, I'm afraid.
Okay, I think picking it up from this point, I don't think I'm saying anything new here when I point out that Washington historically in its foreign policy always preferred to deal with only, when it comes to so-called third world countries, to deal only with one guy, to pick up the phone to them and tell them what's expected from them. There's something in politics called interests. I don't think anybody would be, against something like this.
Friends are temporary, interests are permanent, or something like that.
I think, what happened in January 2011, I think it took Washington and most of the West by surprise.
Yeah, it did.
And they didn't really know what to do in the beginning. And then they looked at, when they had a moment to think about the situation, and they realized, as much as everybody inside Egypt, that the most organized group in the country is the group that can, control the street for the country to be stable and for the interests to be served. That I have no problem.
We don't have time for that. I'm sorry.
Understanding, but in relation to your question, first of all, I never judge. I never say this group is nice or that person is not nice. Okay.
You said they're nice.
Did I say nice? Well, I mean, as personally, when some of them, it can't be, you can't really have a blanket system. You know how many different inclinations within what we call Salafism? Now, some of them. Listen, it would be against everything. If you really believe of this revolution, you would be defending everyone to express their opinion and to be part of the country and of the political process. You have another level.
Finish the point.
Another level of the things, for the point to be complete. What you are really after is the rule of law. Forget about this. Salafists, Ikhwan, liberals, the rule of law. If we manage together to lay the foundations for a healthy society that goes by the rule of law, then the revolution would have succeeded.
Okay, two people here have been asking me for about half an hour to speak. You, sir, and you. Sorry, this question was the future.
I think, it's related to another question. I don't think it's a matter of either the parliamentary elections or the presidential elections. It's the moment that we are in now. It's the sit-in Rabaa or in Nahda is not only about geography, it's about time. It's also a sit-in time. For many people in Rabaa and in Nahda, they still live in pre-June the 30th. No, sorry, no, I have a reserve, no. And in some sense, justifiably so, we're talking about a huge dream that was there in their hands. And suddenly it's been taken away from it. And at the same time, nobody is really giving it a serious attempt to understand this point. So as much as it is a sit-in place, it's also a sit-in time.
Okay, so.
Keith Raffin, I'm a former member of Parliament here. You said you were in favour of a strong army. Could you define what you mean by a strong army? I mean, we're in favour of a strong army here, but we prefer it to stay in the barracks when it's at home.
Yeah,
and there's a clear line of control, political control, to the elected politicians. We have a war cabinet in the case of war. Generals are outside that, they implement. And isn't there a danger with an army that reaches into every part of society, whose tentacles reach into business, industry, and commerce, like Pakistan, that democracy doesn't get a chance to take root? And then you end up, like Pakistan, with occasionally nominal periods of democracy where the army is very much in control, and you end up a failing state and then a failed state.
Okay, that's a clear question, and you've also been asking for a while.
I just have a question for Mr. Fouda. I learned from your program to doubt the so-called electoral process that brought the so-called the first democratically elected President Morsi. I would like you to cast your mind back to your excellent coverage of that period and remind us all why you helped me doubt it and why now we're, repeating the mantra of the democratically elected Morsi. And the army was responsible for that, as has been pointed out.
Right, okay.
I also wanted to just say that it's a little tiring to hear that Egypt isn't like Britain and so on, and Egypt isn't like Switzerland. Egypt has a long history of, it had constitutional rule, it had liberal parliament at the turn of the century. It was the imperialist British who thwarted that process several times, and it's
not
arguably
just in Egypt. We did that
lots of other places.
Yes.
And it's arguably because of the deep-seated understanding of most Egyptians of what democracy is, that they moved first against Mubarak and that they were patient and then moved against Morsi in very, very, very high historic numbers that arguably trump the ballot box, because the ballot box was invented in order to channel the voices of those millions in an effective way. But if you have what you had on the 30th of June, which is a revolutionary situation of multiple sovereignty, there are lots of definitions in political science that can compete with the definition of the coup, then you have a nation who shouldn't be dismissed, I think, as simply learning.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
What about that first point about you would want to go down the road of Pakistan?
The army thing first, I don't disagree with you at all. That's exactly what I meant, by the way, because the thing is, some people now, whether knowingly or not knowingly, on purpose or otherwise, are trying to harm the Egyptian army because they didn't like the role that the army played on June the 30th and on July the 3rd. And when it comes to this, no, you can't, as much as I believe in freedom of expression that should be there for everyone, I wouldn't like that to extend to doubt the role of the army within the definition that you've just pointed out. Now, obviously, we're not going to open the discussion again about what happened exactly, was it a coup or not a coup. No, that's not exactly at all what I meant. But whether or not, sorry, the rest of the point was the Pakistan thing. We had talked about this, and actually, surprise, the U.S. ambassador to Egypt, who was based before that in Pakistan. And so many Egyptians were really, really happy with the way she handled the situation and her special, as it seemed, relationship with the group, the Muslim Brothers in general, and especially Khairat al-Shatir. Indeed, only a few days before June the 30th, she went all the way from the center of Cairo, all the way in the traffic, to meet Khairat al-Shatir in his office in Medinat Nasr, in the east of Cairo. Only a few days. And that wasn't the first time. And nobody knew exactly about that. They had to acknowledge because their cars were filmed by some journalists. Okay, you're the ambassador of the United States. Why are you meeting someone the Egyptian people did not elect? And you have the Morsi at the time. Now, by then we had reached a de facto stage. We know who really pulls the strings, okay? So they did it. And the Americans can be very pragmatic when they want to be pragmatic. Were the elections at the time clean or not clean, I think most people in the end, they said it was clean enough. No. Oh, no, okay, we could, we could spend the whole night talking about, incidents happening here or there, and I know I know exactly what you mean. But in the end, people accepted that. Okay, and yes, I also agree with you that we always have to remind ourselves, because for whoever doesn't know, we have in Egypt this bit of a funny expression. We call it "asiru al-laymun," lemon squeezers, to translate it literally, which means those who, faced by this difficult situation, you either vote an Islamist or a Mubarakist, and the vast majority of at least those who took to the streets on January the 25th and stayed for 18 days camping out there, except of course for the Islamists, they didn't want to vote either. So in the end, they said we couldn't morally vote a Mubarakist again. Then let's try to talk to this guy and his people and try to get them to commit to a few promises. I was one of those people. And when I interviewed Dr. Morsi at the time, I said to him, I'm giving you all the time to convince the Egyptian people who are watching you now that you deserve that. And he went down to small details. I don't know, funnily enough, in the last 5 months or so, it really imposed itself on the program that every now and then I had to show a clip of one promise or another. This is what you said. What did you do? Oh my God. He said, over my dead body, inclusion, women, Christians, constitution, and the rest of it. And it haunted him. And he wasn't the only one. He also talked to other journalists in the country on TV or print, inside Egypt and outside of Egypt. The track is there. We live in a completely different world now. It will haunt you. And that's what happened.
I'm really apologetic to all those people who've got their hands up who haven't been able to get to